Today we're going to talk about variables and properties in object-oriented programming with PHP. What you're going to find out is that some variables that are part of a class we call properties. And these can be used by other classes, they can be uh, inherited, and a lot of other things you can do with them. So that's going to be our main focus today. Now, if any of you are following this series and you're from either Brazil or from Portugal, um, I just found out today that our book, Design Patterns for PHP, is now available in Portuguese. Unfortunately, I don't read Portuguese, and but if I did, I would. Anyhow, let's go take a look at variables and properties in PHP. Okay, today we're going to talk about variables and properties, as this is the third lesson that we've had with object-oriented PHP. First of all, if you're brand new to programming or PHP, you've got to ask yourself what's a variable. And the type of variables that we're using are called scalar variables, and they're called scalar because they store just one thing. They can store a number, and a number can be either an integer or a floating point number. For example, 12.34, perfectly good number. You can store a string. A string is identified as whatever you put between an opening and closing quotes. And third is a Boolean, and a Boolean is true or false. Those are very important in programming because all conditionals are based on some kind of Boolean value. And finally, an object, and an object is an instance of a class, either a built-in class in PHP or one that you create yourself. Variables are identified by dollar signs in PHP. So here you have a variable called myvar equal hello Joe. You have another one called myint, and it's assigned a value of 6. My decimal is assigned a value of 22.95. Now, an important thing to know about PHP, it really doesn't care the nature of the variable that you assign to it. So if you assign myint 6.5, it's perfectly happy, or if you assign nothing but integers to my decimal, it's perfectly happy. In fact, you can assign it a string or whatever you want. By and large, though, we try to keep things tidy so we understand what we're doing by using variable names that describe the kinds of things that we're working with. For example, let's say you have a list for a soccer team and the numbers of the people in the soccer team. So let's say you have 6 in the soccer team, somebody else joins, and now you have 7, or actually probably be a higher number, say we have 12, and 2 more join, and then you have 14. So but you'd use integers for that. And same thing with decimals. If you're using financial operations, you'll usually have some kind of decimal point. For Booleans, here you have a Boolean variable named myState, and you assign it the value of true. Now, very important here, you can either assign it a value of true or false. Do not put quotation marks around Boolean values because then PHP thinks they're strings. And so just in this particular case, you have words, but you don't want to have quotation marks around them. Finally, you have a variable. You can declare an instance of a class. Here, for example, we have a variable named worker, and we're assigning it new1prop. When you assign a variable an object, you have to create an instance of that object using the new word. Okay, let's take a look at a running program with this. And so we'll switch over to our actual program, and here we have the program, and then we have a class named oneProp. And the very first thing we have something called magic word. Now, magic word is a property of the class oneProp. It works just like a variable, and so you might think of a property of a class as simply a variable that belonged to the class. In this case, we have something called private, and that refers to the visibility of the property. And we'll talk about that later. We're not going to talk about visibility today. We'll do that at another time. And so we have a method called show properties. And within that method, we have a reference that says this magic word. Magic word is the name of the property, and it works just like a variable. We use, after a variable or property is declared within a class, and we want to reference it again, we use the word this. And in fact, we also do that with inherited classes, but that's another story. We'll talk about that later too. So here you have this magic word equal h1 alakazam h1. Now, an important thing and a neat feature about PHP is that you can include HTML tags within a quotation, and it treats them just like an HTML tag. So if we want to have our word alakazam appear an h1 size on an output, then we can put the h1 tags around it. And notice that we don't have to use any kind of concatenation using the dot operator. We just put the whole thing in quotes. Then we have return this magic word being the property. Now here, outside of the class, we have the worker, and the worker is simply the name of the variable, and we create an instance of the class oneprop using the new operator, or the new word. We use the same assignment operator, but we use the new special word new. And then when we print it out, here we have the instance of one property, and we use a little dash and arrow to reference the method. And the name of the method is show properties. In most other languages, you'll see a dot instead of a dash arrow, but we use the dot in PHP for concatenation, and so instead we use little dash and arrow. There's some other languages that use the same thing for referencing an object's properties or methods. Okay, so when we run this thing, what we ought to see is the word alakazam, and there it is. It's printed out within a web page, and it's running on my local host, as you can see here. So it's running on an Apache server within the computer, and it says alakazam. It would show the same thing if your server were on a real server. Okay, so this is how we create properties, how we store values into variables, and when we have a value that we store into a variable within a class, and under certain circumstances. We'll talk about that later too. Okay, that's all for today.